My son-in-law grabbed my right wrist with both hands and bent it backward against the arm of my own recliner until I heard something in my shoulder make a sound I hadn't heard since I played football in 1976. I didn't cry out. I sat perfectly still, the way I'd learned to sit in 31 years as a postal inspector when suspects would try to read you. I just looked at him. He let go and stood over me, breathing hard, waiting to see what I'd do. I didn't do anything. The grandfather clock in the hallway counted seconds. He left through the front door, and I sat there in my recliner, with my right arm in my lap, and Virginia's photograph staring at me from the mantelpiece. And I made a plan. The next morning, I drove 40 minutes to their development near the lake with a padded yellow envelope on the passenger seat. My son-in-law came to the door in a pressed shirt, like he'd been expecting a business meeting. He saw the envelope and something changed behind his eyes. He stepped aside to let me in and said, "I knew you'd come to your senses, old man." He reached out to take it. Before I tell you what was in that envelope, please subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I read every single one. I need to back up. My name doesn't matter much for this story, but Virginia's does. We were married 43 years. She taught 4th grade at Crescent Ridge Elementary for 31 of those years, and she knew every child in that district by name and remembered them at 30 the same way she remembered them at 9. We built our house in Norwood Hollow in 1987, the year after our daughter Laurel was born. Virginia picked the kitchen tile. I poured the front walkway myself on a Saturday in October when it was just cold enough that I shouldn't have tried it, and the lines are slightly uneven to this day. I have never once thought about fixing them. Virginia had a stroke on a Thursday afternoon in September of 2023. She was in the garden cutting back the hydrangeas. She was gone by Friday evening. There was nothing that built up to it, and nothing after it that felt like closure, just a very loud life that went completely quiet. Our daughter Laurel was 37 when Virginia died. She'd been married to my son-in-law for 4 years by then. He worked in commercial real estate development, or said he did. In the time I'd known him, I had never once seen a completed project with his name on it. But I had seen a lot of proposals on nice paper and a lot of expensive dinners where he picked up the check and then mentioned the check later in conversation when it was useful to him. He was the kind of man who stood too close when he shook your hand and held eye contact about 15 seconds longer than was comfortable. I had told Virginia once, maybe 2 years into his marriage to Laurel, that something about him felt like a coat hanger shaped like a man. She'd laughed. I think she understood what I meant. He came to me the first time about money 8 months after the funeral. "Storage units," he said. There was a facility outside of Clarksville that was about to come on the market, and he had a buyer lined up but needed bridge financing. $20,000. He would pay it back in 4 months with 6% interest. He had documents, projections, a signed letter of intent from the buyer. It all looked real enough. I gave him the money because Laurel was sitting on my couch when he asked, her hands folded in her lap, and she looked at me the way she used to look at me when she was 12 and had asked for something she wasn't sure she deserved. The 4 months came and went, then 8 months, then a year. When I asked about it, he had reasons. The buyer had pulled out. The market shifted. He was pursuing a different angle that would pay everything back plus the new amount he needed. $7,000 this time, just to keep the deal from collapsing entirely. I didn't give him the $7,000. I told him I needed the original 20 back before we could talk about anything new. That was 6 months before the night he came to the house. It was a Tuesday evening in March, still cold enough that I'd had the fireplace going. I was going through Virginia's recipe box, the old tin one with the hinged lid she'd gotten from her mother, writing out the ones that were only in her handwriting so Laurel would have copies. My son-in-law didn't knock. He opened the front door and came in like he owned the floor plan, my daughter trailing 3 steps behind him. Her coat was on wrong, like she'd put it on in a hurry and no one had told her. "We need to have a conversation," he said. I set down the recipe box. "I've got coffee on. Laurel, you want a cup?" "She's fine," he said before she could turn toward the kitchen. He sat down in the wingback that had been Virginia's. I didn't ask him to move. I sat in my recliner and waited. He laid out the deal. There was a self-storage operation in Hendersonville, 18 units plus a climate-controlled section. The owner was retiring and willing to do seller financing if my son-in-law could put down $35,000 to show good faith. It was a cash-producing asset. He had a folder. "You still owe me $20,000, I said. His jaw moved the way it did when he was deciding how much patience to perform. I'd watched him do it, at Thanksgiving, at Laurel's birthday dinner, at the one Christmas when Virginia had gently asked about his family and he'd given her an answer that turned the conversation into a wall. "That money is going to come back to you as part of the return on this deal. You give me the 35, the 20 becomes equity, and in 18 months you're looking at. I want the 20 back, not as equity, as the $20,000 you borrowed from me and promised to return. Provoke it?" Laurel was standing near the hallway entrance. I could see her from the corner of my eye. Her fingers were wrapped around the strap of her purse, and she was looking at the floor, not the way someone looks at it when they're bored, but the way someone looks at it when they are trying to become part of it. "Laurel," I said, "are you all right?" He stood up before she could answer. Not fast, not dramatic, just smooth, the way practiced people move, like violence is just a change in room arrangement. He stepped between me and my daughter, and then he sat down on the arm of my recliner, which put him above me and close to me in a way that was designed to feel like pressure. He leaned in and said very quietly, "You're going to give me this money. You're going to give it to me, because Laurel needs this to work and because you don't want to be the reason it doesn't. I need you to stand up and get out of my house." He didn't stand up. He reached across and took my right wrist in both hands, and he bent it. Not a grab, not a shove, a slow, deliberate bend backward, the way you'd test a piece of metal to see where it gave. The pain was immediate and went all the way up into my neck. I heard something shift in my shoulder. I kept my face still. 31 years of sitting across from people who did not want to tell me the truth, and I kept my face absolutely still. "Think about it," he said. He let go. He stood up. He said to Laurel, "Let's go." And he walked out of my house. Laurel looked at me for exactly 2 seconds. Her mouth opened and then closed. Then she followed him out. I sat in that recliner for a while. The fire was still going. The recipe box was on the table beside me. The pain in my shoulder was a low grinding thing that got louder when I tried to lift my arm above waist height. Virginia's photograph was on the mantelpiece, taken at Niagara Falls in 2011. The one where she was laughing at something off to the left of the frame. I asked her silently what she wanted me to do. She went on looking at whatever was making her laugh in 2011. After a while, I picked up my phone with my left hand and called my daughter. She answered on the first ring. "Daddy, I'm so sorry, he just..." "Laurel, I need you to listen to me and not him for the next 60 seconds. Are you somewhere he can't hear you?" A pause then. "I'm in the bathroom." "Good. Has he hurt you before?" Silence, the long kind. "How long, honey?" "Daddy, please don't." "How long?" "Since about the 2nd year." Her voice went small, like she was fitting herself into a space. "It's not all the time. He doesn't mean to be like this. He just gets..." "Stop." I said it gently, the way you stop someone from walking into traffic. "You don't have to explain him to me tonight. I need you to do one thing. I need you to put a bag together, just what fits in one bag, and hide it somewhere he won't look. Don't use it yet. Just have it ready. Can you do that?" She said yes. I told her I loved her, and I'd call her in the morning, and I hung up. Then I called Paulette Odom. Paulette had been the staff attorney for our regional postal inspection office for 14 years before she opened her own firm. She handled civil litigation and, when the circumstances required it, criminal referrals. We had not spoken in almost 3 years. She picked up on the second ring like no time had passed at all. "This is either very good news or very bad news," she said. "The second kind." "Are you hurt?" "I believe my shoulder is separated, and I need you to know about it before I do anything else. Don't shower. Don't change clothes. Don't take anything stronger than Tylenol, because I need you coherent. I'm sending my associate to drive you to Vanderbilt Medical, and I'm meeting you in the ER in 45 minutes. Paulette. 45 minutes. We're documenting everything tonight." She hung up before I could thank her. At Vanderbilt, they confirmed a partially dislocated shoulder and a hairline fracture in the socket where the tendons had pulled. The ER physician wrote in his notes that the injury was consistent with a deliberate forced hyperextension of the joint. Paulette arrived in a rain jacket with a camera and a yellow legal pad. She photographed my shoulder, my wrist, the bruising that had come up along my forearm. She took my statement twice, once recorded, once written out by hand, and she had me sign both. In the car on the way home at midnight, she asked me what I actually wanted out of all of this. I looked at the freeway lights passing overhead. I want my daughter safe, I said. I want him to face what he's done, and I want him to know, when it's over, that I was the one who did it. And who are you? She said, not sarcastically. She really wanted to know. I am a retired federal inspector who spent 31 years finding things people tried to hide. He forgot that. She nodded once and drove. The next morning, I called my son-in-law at 8:15. He answered on the third ring, bright and easy, the tone men like him use when they think a problem has been processed and filed away. Hey, we should probably touch base about last night. I got a little heated. You know how it is with business stress. I understand, I said. I've been thinking about what you said. Can I come over this afternoon? I have something for you. A pause, just long enough to taste. Yeah, absolutely. Laurel's out running errands, so it'll just be us. Better that way, actually. I said I'd be there at 2. Meanwhile, Paulette's associate, a young woman named Opal, who had the organized quiet of someone who had heard every variety of human damage and found none of it surprising, had begun making calls. She was looking for a pattern. Men like my son-in-law, Paulette had told me, rarely do this to only one family. They do it until something stops them. Opal found 2 people in 3 days. The first was a man I'll call Irving. He was 68 years old, a retired middle school science teacher from Gallatin. 2 years earlier, my son-in-law had approached him at a Lions Club meeting with an investment opportunity in a franchise laundromat. Irving had put in $22,000 from his savings. The franchise was never opened. When Irving pressed for updates, my son-in-law had driven to his house at 9 o'clock on a weeknight and pushed him hard enough against the kitchen doorframe to crack his glasses and raise a bruise on his cheekbone. Irving had told no one. His wife had Parkinson's and he hadn't wanted to upset her. And then, after a while, he told himself the money was just gone, and the shame of having been fooled was something he'd carry quietly. When Opal called him, he went silent for so long she thought the line had dropped. I thought I was the only one he'd done that to, he finally said. I drove out to Gallatin on a Wednesday afternoon. Irving met me at his door in a cardigan, holding a mug of tea. His house was small and neat, a retirement house, the kind where every surface has a purpose, and there's a bird feeder visible from the kitchen window. We sat at his table, and he poured me tea I didn't drink, and he talked for almost an hour. About how my son-in-law had been charming at first, how he'd listened to Irving talk about his career, and his students and his wife, and seemed genuinely interested, and how by the time Irving realized the interest was instrumental, it was already $22,000 too late. When he came to my house, Irving said, I kept thinking about how I was going to explain it to Marion. How I was going to tell her that I'd let someone into our life who would do something like that. I decided I just wouldn't tell her. She doesn't know to this day. He wrapped both hands around his mug. Outside, 2 cardinals were taking turns at the feeder. Irving, I said, would you be willing to testify? Not just about the money, about what he did to you physically. He was quiet for a long time. Marion would find out, he said. She would. I waited. What do you think she'd feel? He thought about that carefully. Then, I think she'd be furious, he said quietly. I think she'd want to fight. My daughter spent years protecting the man who hurt her, I said. She didn't do it because she was foolish. She did it because she was trapped. You weren't foolish, Irving. You were trapped too. The only way out of a trap like that is to let other people see it. He nodded very slowly. He set his mug down. He looked at the cardinals at the feeder for a moment. Yes, he said. Tell me what I have to do. The second person Opal found was a woman named Carmen, who had worked as a bookkeeper for one of my son-in-law's short-lived business entities. She was owed 6 weeks of back wages. When she'd pressed for payment, he had cornered her in the parking lot of his office building and told her that if she filed a wage claim, he had a contact who would make sure her family's finances were examined in ways she wouldn't enjoy. Carmen had stayed quiet. She did not stay quiet when Opal called her. I made one mistake during those 2 weeks. Paulette had told me clearly to stay offline, to not post anything, to give no indication of what was being prepared. But one evening, after my son-in-law's mother called me to say I was a bitter old man trying to destroy her son's marriage, I went to Facebook and wrote a paragraph. I didn't name anyone. I said something about how sometimes people confuse silence for weakness, and sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should have been watching more carefully. I posted it at 10 p.m. By 7 the next morning, Paulette was on my phone. Leland. She only used my first name when something had gone wrong. I know. His attorney already has a screenshot. They're going to argue you have a personal vendetta, that this is about wounded pride and not justice. I took it down. It's already been distributed. Leland, I need you to understand something. When you are in the right and in pain and angry, that is the most dangerous state you can be in. Because you will do things that feel righteous and cost you later. I thanked her and I hung up and I wrote that down on an index card and taped it inside my kitchen cabinet door. It cost us 2 additional weeks of maneuvering with the prosecutor. It didn't sink the case, but it reminded me that being right is not the same thing as being careful, and I needed to be both. On a Thursday afternoon in early April, I drove to their house with the padded yellow envelope. My son-in-law met me at the door in a pressed shirt, as I said. He smelled like he'd shaved 10 minutes ago. He looked at the envelope with an expression that was trying to be casual and not quite managing it. He stepped aside and I walked into the front hallway. "I'll stand," I said, my shoulders still giving me trouble. "Right, yeah." He said it without inflection. "So you said you had something." I held out the envelope. He took it. He carried it to the kitchen island, the way men carry things they've been waiting for, with a deliberateness that was almost ceremonial. He ran one hand over the front of it. "You made the right call. This deal is going to make both of us whole." "Open it," I said. He tore the tab on the padded envelope and reached inside. I watched his face do exactly what I had hoped it would do. First, confusion, because there was no cashier's check, no banker's envelope, no storage unit paperwork. Second, something cautious and cold moving behind his eyes as he recognized what the first document was. Third, the color left his face the way color leaves a room when the lights go out. The first document was a criminal complaint filed with the Davidson County Sheriff's Office. Aggravated assault. The hearing date was the following Monday. The second was a petition for legal separation, filed that morning by Paulette's office, on behalf of my daughter, who had signed it at my kitchen table at 6 a.m. while her husband was still asleep. The third was a protective order, effective immediately, prohibiting contact with my daughter, with me, and with either of our residences. He had been formally served the moment I handed him that envelope, because I had handed it to him in full view of the security camera he'd installed himself above his own front door. He looked up at the camera, then back at me. "You son of a..." "There's one more thing," I said. "At the bottom." He reached in with 2 fingers and pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded twice. He opened it. It was a printed photograph. My son-in-law and a woman I didn't recognize, at a casino in Tunica, Mississippi. The timestamp in the metadata was 11 days after Laurel's gallbladder surgery, during which she had called me worried about the bills, and he had assured her he was handling everything. The woman in the photograph had her arm through his. They were both holding drinks and facing the camera with the easy expressions of people who believed they were not being looked at. Laurel had known about this woman for 7 months. She'd found the hotel receipts herself. She had stayed because she had nowhere to go. Now she had somewhere to go. My son-in-law stood at the kitchen island and looked at that photograph for a long time. Then he said my name, and then he said something much uglier, and I turned around and walked out of his house and got into my car and drove 4 blocks and pulled into a parking lot and sat with my hands on the steering wheel until they stopped shaking. Then I drove home. Laurel was in my driveway with 2 duffel bags and her cat, a tabby named Clover, sitting in the passenger window watching the street. She was on the porch steps when I pulled in. I sat down beside her, and we didn't say anything for a while. "It's done," I said. She put her head on my good shoulder, and we watched the late afternoon light move across Virginia's hydrangeas. The criminal case went to trial in late October. Davidson County Criminal Court, 3rd floor. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled like old wood and institutional cleaning products, the same as every courthouse I'd ever worked in. My son-in-law arrived with his attorney, and the expression of a man confident he could charm a room the way he'd always charmed rooms. He could not. The prosecutor presented the medical records, the photographic documentation, the ER physician's written assessment of injury, consistent with deliberate forced hyperextension. She played 22 seconds of doorbell footage from my son-in-law's own camera. Me handing him the envelope, him opening it, him taking the half-step toward me before thinking better of it. Irving testified. He was nervous at first, but when the defense attorney tried to characterize him as a confused older gentleman who had misremembered a business disagreement, Irving sat up in his seat and said, quietly and clearly, "Sir, I taught science for 33 years. I know the difference between a business disagreement and a man who put me against my own doorframe. The bruise lasted 11 days. I took a photograph of it. I have it on my phone right now." The courtroom went very still. Carmen testified about the parking lot, about the threat, about the months afterward of not sleeping well. She was steady and precise. Laurel testified on the state side. The prosecutor asked her one question that I don't think either of them expected to produce what it produced. She asked, "Had the defendant ever been physically threatening toward her?" My daughter looked at the prosecutor, then at me, then at her husband across the courtroom. "The first time was in our 3rd year," she said. "He pushed me against the bathroom door, hard enough to crack the towel bar off the wall. The most recent time was a week before he hurt my father. He grabbed my arm in the kitchen and left bruises I covered with a cardigan for 2 weeks. I have photographs of those also." She didn't cry. She said it the way you say something you have been not saying for a very long time, and the saying of it is its own kind of relief. My son-in-law's attorney put him on the stand against what I am certain was his own advice. My son-in-law was sure he could explain his way through it. Men like him always are. He contradicted himself on the timeline, raised his voice twice during the prosecutor's questioning. And in the end, when she asked about woman in the tunica photograph, he stood half out of his seat and pointed across the courtroom at Laurel and said she had poisoned her own father against him. The judge used the gavel. The jury was out less than a day. Guilty on the assault charge. Guilty on a fraud charge added after Irving's testimony. 14 months in county. Work release possible after 8. Restitution ordered to Irving, to Carmen, to me. A 5-year protective order for Laurel. When the bailiff cuffed him, my son-in-law looked across the courtroom at me, the way he had looked at me in his kitchen, waiting for some reaction he could use. I looked back at him the way Virginia used to look at the students who had tried to negotiate their grades after missing too many classes. Calm, clear, finished with the conversation. He looked away first. Laurel and I drove home in the early dark of November, and she made soup from Virginia's recipe box, the potato leek one with the cream stirred in at the end, and we ate at the kitchen table while Clover sat in the 3rd chair and pretended not to want anything. There is something I have not yet told, something that found its way to me 3 weeks after the verdict, when Paulette's office was going through documents collected during discovery. Among them was a scanned copy of a letter, handwritten on Virginia's personal stationery, the cream-colored paper with the small VR monogram at the top. The date on it was 6 weeks before her stroke. Virginia had written to me. She said she had noticed things about my son-in-law that she hadn't known how to say directly. She said she had seen the way Laurel held herself when he was in a room. She said she had found a credit card statement in Laurel's coat pocket, left behind after a visit, that showed charges she couldn't account for on Laurel's salary. She said she had wanted to talk to me about it, but she was afraid of being wrong, and afraid of Laurel pulling away if she pushed before she was certain. She said she planned to talk to me about it in the fall. The fall for Virginia never came. The letter had been in a stack of her personal papers that had made its way, and the how of it was not accidental, Paulette believed, though impossible to prove at this point, into a box of miscellaneous documents my son-in-law had offered to help sort and store after the funeral. The box had been in their garage for 2 years. It came back to me because discovery required the return of all personal property. I sat at the kitchen table with that letter for a long time after Laurel had gone to bed. Clover came and put one paw on my arm the way cats do when they want you to know they are present. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it along its original creases and put it back in its envelope and put the envelope in the tin recipe box between the index cards for the potato leek soup and the lemon pound cake. That is where it belongs. Virginia had seen it. She had been working her way toward telling me, and she ran out of time, and the love was in the working toward it. The love was in not wanting to be wrong about a man her daughter had chosen. The love was in the letter itself, still folded, still waiting, all this time. Laurel is living with me now while she figures out what comes next. She has a job she likes at a property management office downtown, and she takes a ceramics class on Tuesday evenings at a community studio because Virginia always said she had the hands for it, and she wanted to find out if that was true. I don't ask her how she's doing in the way that means I'm listening for a specific answer. I just make coffee in the mornings and leave her door alone and let the house do what it used to do when she was growing up here, which is hold people without asking too much of them. Irving sends a card every few weeks. He and Marion have started going to a Thursday evening ballroom dancing class at the Elks Lodge in Gallatin. He says it was Marion's idea. He says she cried when he finally told her what had happened, and then she said, "Well, we are going to go dancing. I work in the garden when the weather allows." Virginia's hydrangeas survived the winter the way they always do, and the front walkway is still slightly uneven from the pour I made in October of 1987, and the grandfather clock in the hallway keeps ticking the way it has since the day we moved in. Some evenings Laurel and I sit on the porch after dinner and watch the dark come in. She doesn't say much and I don't say much, and we don't need to. The neighborhood goes quiet around 8. Sometimes a moth finds the porch light and circles there in the warm air, and I think about the fact that I am 67 years old and I am still learning what it means to protect the people you love without waiting until someone forces your hand. I should have moved sooner. I know that. I sat across from liars for 3 decades, and I did not see the one sitting at my own dinner table. I don't know if I forgive myself for that yet. I think Virginia would tell me that forgiving yourself is not the point. The point is what you do with the time that's left. If this story meant something to you, please hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell me down in the comments, what would you have put in that envelope? I read everyone.